She's appearing before the board to request, to talk about our Alleghany Animal Control Ordinance. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be heard. I too will try to be brief, though I will not be as brief as that lady. Tiny bit of background, and 3 weeks ago we had an incident with our neighbors who let their dogs run loose, and we had done the good neighbor thing and been over there and asked them to please keep the dogs put up because they were getting into our yard and creating havoc. And 3 weeks ago, 2 of their dogs came under our fence and killed 2 of our chickens and badly injured a third. I went over there and banged on the door after I let some time go by because I was hot about it. And she wouldn't come to the door to speak to me. So, having gone back twice and not gotten any result from her, I called Animal Control and was told that Animal Control is out of the office as of 3 o'clock and wouldn't be available till the next morning. I called Animal Control at 7 o'clock the next morning, and they told me that if they go out there and the dog is back on the chain, there's nothing they can do. And I was not pleased with that answer, so I called the Sheriff's Department. And the Sheriff's Department explained to me that if the dog was in fact on the chain, there was nothing that they could do. And I said, well, when we first started keeping chickens, we had an incident about 3 years ago where a guy up the hill had some dogs. He had a pack of dogs that were running loose, and they killed all 7 of our chickens under a minute. And the sheriff's office came out and took some pictures, and they went up there and took the dogs. And that was when I learned that if dogs know that chickens are on a property, they're going to come back and come back and come back, and there's no end to it. And I asked the sheriff's deputy, who was very kind and very courteous and very professional about the whole thing. I explained that situation to him, and I said, what's different? And he said, well, now the county manager has got a person that's designated to animal control, so we have an officer who deals with that. I said, so you're telling me that because there is somebody to do the job is not going to be done? And he didn't have an answer for that. 10 minutes later, the deputy was in my driveway. And he went over to speak to this woman. She wouldn't open the door to him. Animal Control went, but he wouldn't open the door to them. And I ended up going to the magistrate's office to swear out a charge and was told I had to file a civil case for $139 to recoup $50 worth of chickens. And so I went to the county commissioner's office, and Manager Adams was kind enough, he heard me and he came out and spoke to me about it and said there is in fact an ordinance on the books, but it's old and it hasn't been looked at in a while. And so I went back to the magistrate's office and we pulled it out, and there is an animal control ordinance. It was put on the books here in Alleghany County in 1983. And it has not been looked at or revised or addressed for more than 30 years. And I put a lot of thought into it before I came here tonight, and what really kind of sealed my decision was that I said, well, maybe this is a neighbor thing and it's out in the country and we need to deal with it. But I was at a ladies' brunch yesterday, and a friend of mine said that she and her husband live right near the hospital here in town, and they got some new neighbors recently who have 2 very large pit bull type dogs that are loose in the neighborhood all the time. And her husband was out jogging Friday night, and these dogs came after him and chased him, and he couldn't even get to the porch of the house to say to these people, hey, put your dogs up, because he was afraid if he stopped running that he would be attacked. So this is not something that's just happening out in the country like where I live. This is happening here in town where there's pedestrian traffic. The hospital is not that far from Krause Park. The ordinance that's on the books is not, it doesn't really have any teeth, if you'll pardon a bad pun. It says if the dog is found to be at large and creating a nuisance, the dog may, and the may part is iffy according to Animal Control, be picked up and impounded and can be reclaimed by its owner at any time by paying a $10 fine. So the dog goes to the pound, the owner picks it up for $10, and we're back where we started. For 2 or more infractions, and there is no limit on infractions according to the ordinance, it goes to $20 a pop, and the owner can get the dog back, and again, you're back in the same place. We've spent thousands of dollars to fence out threat on our property. And it has to also be incumbent upon people who have dogs, and I'm addressing dogs specifically, it can be any kind of animals, to have them under their control or have them suitably contained so that they're not running loose and making havoc every place. Now, in section 11 of the Animal Control Code, it says, any animal which appears to be strayed, at large, or unwanted. And I think these definitions should be expanded to include the word neglected. Because the reason, I don't blame the dogs. These dogs got off the chains and came under our fence because they're not fed. And and they're hungry, and they came where they knew that they could find food. So I think that definition needs to be added. The animal can be confiscated and held for 5 days, but what if the damage is done and animal control comes out and, like what happened to me, the animal is back on the chain by the time animal control is able to get there? It didn't seem to matter that I witnessed these dogs on my property and was able to run outside and run them off, or they might have killed all the chickens and drove them off, and I knew who they belonged to, and there was nothing that animal control could or maybe knew that they could do. It is supposed to be a misdemeanor under the law pursuant to state law. It's punishable by fine not to exceed $50 and 30 days in jail, which is certainly not the outcome I'm looking for here, to violate any ordinance adopted by a board of county commissioners. This is your ordinance. I spent a lot of time shuttling back and forth between the magistrate's office and the sheriff's department, and I ended up having to swear out a criminal charge, which then the sheriff's department went to file. And I feel like the charge maybe should have been pursued by the sheriff's office without my having to press suit about it. And I realized that to a lot of people, this, I felt very nuisancey to bother the sheriff's department with this kind of thing. But we have an investment in our livestock, and I realize that under the law, they're only livestock, but we look at them as pets that happen to provide us with eggs. And under the ordinance as well, there is no provision for reimbursement to anyone who has suffered property damage or loss to whether it's plants or livestock or whatever it is. There's no recompense system. I think that this ordinance needs to be revisited by the commissioners, and also I think that the role of the county maintenance workers as animal control officers kind of needs to be examined and corrected. You have put them in a bad position. They have now become quasi-law enforcement officers when being sent out to someone's house to deal with something like this, and people can get emotional about their animals in that situation. And I don't know that the maintenance workers, as nice as they were, and they did come out and check, and they did come out and spot check again, but I don't know that they're necessarily, just because they have a truck that will hold a dog, are versed in what they can do, what they're permitted to do, what is the law in this case, and I don't know that they should have to be prepared to enforce it. That really falls to the sheriff's department. I realized that animal control was kind of rolled into the maintenance department as a cost-saving measure, and it probably has been very effective because we don't have budget a lot of times for all the full-time people we'd like to have. But animal control is not available after 3 p.m. during the week, and not on the weekends at all. I see that as a problem. The sheriff's deputy in this case, Steve Carrier, who handled my call, was wonderful and helpful and respectful and marvelous. But in the past, when we have had this sort of incident happen, and I was advised by the sheriff's department several years ago, and not this particular deputy, I want to stress that the unofficial policy of the county is shoot, shovel, and shut up. And I don't think that that is an acceptable answer. And I was told by the magistrate when I asked him, so I can shoot the dog if it comes back on my property? He said, oh no, you can't shoot the dog just for being on your land. It has to be in the commission of killing the livestock. So the answer is that I have to sit outside with my gun, wait for the dog to come back, wait for the dogs to attack the chickens, and then shoot it. I find that ridiculous and completely unacceptable. So there has to be a way to beef up this ordinance so that it actually means something. That if you have an animal that is potentially dangerous, that it really does need to be under your control. I think that the fines need to be stiffer and the cost higher. I think that repeat offenses of unlimited numbers should not be met with $20 a pop. That's not fixing the problem for anybody. I think that at some point the county has to consider the removal of dogs that are considered a nuisance in a neighborhood, because even nice dogs, I don't blame the dogs. The dogs are sweet, but they're hungry. And even good dogs who run in a pack will engage in pack behavior, and it becomes a danger to livestock, to people, to anybody who's there. There needs to be a provision in the ordinance for someone to be able to collect damages by some method other than filing a civil suit. And I want to say this, I love dogs. I have dogs. I have a pit bull mix. And I don't want to kill a dog. And I don't have any desire to take away somebody's well-loved pet from their house. But at the same time, I don't want to be out in my yard with my crying son burying a paper bag full of feathers and chicken feed and trying to explain to him why their pet gets to kill our pet. I think that the commissioners need to re-examine and rewrite this ordinance and update it in order to protect people of the county and livestock from the threat of animals at large, and make the penalties harsh enough so that people who don't feel the need to act responsibly will be compelled to. I thank you for letting me speak my piece about that.
Thank you. Do we have questions or comments?
Did a nice presentation.
Thank you. I'm very comfortable in front of people.
What is your wish? Do you take this under advisement or?
Absolutely. I would hope that we could have a committee maybe and study this.
Any comments about the current ordinance or anything?
It's purely a resource issue,
Yeah.
is what it is. It's Ms. Chekanow fairly well described the process. I mean, in regards to, we have our maintenance individuals that are in control or over the animal control. Just one thing I would add, the town of Sparta does have its own ordinance, that's separate from this one. So in that particular case, I would advise, that's what you were describing earlier, that they call the town police, because it's a little bit different, county versus town. The county provides services to the town, meaning we will basically show up, help trap the animal, things of that nature, but if it rises to a higher level, then in the town of Sparta, a town police officer actually shows up and issues a citation if they deem it appropriate under their ordinance. So if there's a particular situation that you're aware of in town limits, if you call our maintenance, our animal control will come out and respond very similar to how we responded to you. But if you know someone that has a higher level, I would call the town police department, and then they can respond and then they can issue citations. Really, from out in the county, just a couple things. It is unlawful for your dog to run at large that causes a nuisance. So it is, people ask me all the time, do we have a leash law in Alleghany County? It's not exactly a leash law under this current ordinance. It has to be an animal that's also causing a nuisance. And it has to be a dog causing the nuisance. When you look at our ordinance, it only talks about it being illegal for dogs to run at large and causing a nuisance. The second thing, vicious animals. It is also unlawful to have a vicious animal. The way it's defined in our ordinance, a vicious animal is one who attacks a human once, or attacks livestock multiple times. It says habitually attack livestock, so I just read that as more than once. So it is against the law to have a vicious animal that's not maintained. So realize that doesn't mean that you immediately get charged if you have somebody necessarily attacking livestock for a second time. It just means they're supposed to restrain it, and then if they refuse to restrain the vicious animal, then it can go to the next level. The other thing too is, she's correct, as far as general dog calls to pick up dogs, we do not go out at night or on weekends. The only two times we do respond on night and weekends is when there is a bite involved and or rabies are involved. And generally speaking, in either of those situations, we bring the health department into the conversations also. There's been several nights that I've been on the phone with the health department that's dealing with some individual. I mean, that goes beyond necessarily dog bites. I mean, Larry, you know, we've had raccoons, bats, all sorts of types of bites on the weekends where we brought the health department in on that discussion. The reality is, I've described everything that's against the law in our ordinance, but at the end of the day, you do have to have the ability to, let's just say they violate the ordinance, you have to have the ability to go through, file with the magistrate, you have to file the charge, you have to go to court, you have to go, and that's where, quite honestly, to take it to that level, I do lack resources to take it past the level that service that we're providing right now. Whether it be whether it be a better trained animal control officer or a law enforcement officer, or whatever you wanna call it, that's where we do lack the resources to take it. I mean, for this example that we're talking about, let's say this was a habitual thing, you know, just to say this happened more than once. You know, we would have to have a trained individual that go out and take a sworn statement from Ms. Chekanow. You'd have to take that statement to the magistrate's office. You'd have to file under our ordinance, misdemeanor charge. Then you'd have to follow up, go through the court system, in which that would go to the prosecutor side, and you'd have to have someone, I'd have to have the resources for someone to follow through with all of those actions. And right now, I'm not saying we wouldn't ever do that, but we do everything in our power to try to settle the situation before it ends up in court, because I know I lack the resources to take it there. We do get law enforcement involved. A lot of times, 9 out of 10 times, you get, the sheriff's office does work with our maintenance. They will go out. If state laws apply, they will attempt to provide state law, apply state law to it. And a lot of times when a law enforcement officer does show up on the scene, that helps take care of the situation. And, you know, we do have Commissioner Davis. I know you've been out multiple times with law enforcement and gotten people to tie up the dog, restrain the dog. But if we're wanting to take it to the next level, meaning recouping, you know, I think what you're looking for is recouping. That still would have to be decided by a court, meaning it would still have to be, you saw it, the person who got charged would say whatever they're gonna say, and then at the end of the day, a judge would decide whether or not you would recoup anything. Same thing that's gonna occur when you go through your civil.
And we do have a court date for this. We actually did decide to take it to that level because we were left with no other recourse, and this woman wouldn't speak to us. It's not that we wanted to do it that way, but I think that if you had an ordinance where people realized on the first offense, well, I gotta pay $50 to get my dog back, and if you tell them, next time you do it, it's $250 to get your dog back. I think that that would have an impact on people. I think that it's possible. I know that the sheriff's office can work with animal control, and the two departments, animal control came out and the sheriff's department came out, they were not working in conjunction together. Perhaps it's possible to have a liaison on each shift in the sheriff's office that just kind of pulls those calls if and when they come in, so that your maintenance guys are not going out there enforcing the law without law enforcement with them. There has to be a way to make people understand that this is a real thing and it's a real danger, and that you have to be responsible if you've got something running loose like that. And that's all I'm looking for, is for you guys to look at this ordinance and say, let's update it and put a little bite in it, add it on again, but make it so it means something to people.
Is the town ordinance fine the same as the county's?
If it's impounded, it's the same fine.
It's the same fine.
But they take it to, it's my understanding that they take it to the next level, and that's issuing citations, which is a different set of, it's the misdemeanor fines that we're talking about, not the fine that we're talking about to go retrieve your animal. So that fine is the same, because they're basically retrieving it from the animal shelter. But if the town chooses to take it a step further and issue a citation, then those are other fines that are, if they're found guilty. You know, again, you realize that just because a citation's issued doesn't necessarily mean they're paying the fine. They still have to go through court, and it has to be decided through court.
Any other questions, comments, Larry?
Does maintenance, they still go out on weekends in an emergency, don't they?
The bites and yes, bites, rabies.
Livestock,
I'm sorry?
livestock.
Yeah, if you had a slot, I mean, it just depends upon what we're talking about. Generally speaking, it's mostly bites and rabies, but Larry and I've worked this out. I'm going back to the years where we had those Pyrenees that were slaughtering those sheep, and yes, if we had something massive going on like that, then we would attempt to go out and try to deal with it.
What's the wishes of the board? Commissioner Lee said you'd like to do a little more
I'd like to study
work
it a
on it.
little bit.
You'd like to study that and maybe report back to us?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And Commissioner Davis has a lot of experience in that.
Yes,
too.
he does.
Practical experience, hands-on
Since your
experience.
volunteering is imminent.
Well, thank you, Linda.
Thank you, folks, I
And also,
appreciate it.
you will